I'm going to show you how this kind of atheist can destroy your faith if you're not prepared. We're going to look at 6 examples in today's video, and the final example in today's video is an apparent contradiction which catches many Christians out. Don't be one of them. Now, this atheist right here is critiquing the book of Genesis, Genesis chapter 26, and the first point he tries to make is that the Bible is just reusing old plot lines.
You can already tell they are reusing plot lines. There was a famine. Another famine. Not the famine we already told you about. A new one.
So on the outset, it sounds convincing, but there are major problems with this. And we'll see that as we go through the next 5 after this as well. Genesis chapter 12, verse 4, and we can look at verse 10. Notice what it says. Abraham departed from his homeland and he was about 75 years old, right? That's what the Bible says quite clearly. Then as we scroll down to verse 10, as you can see here, what does it say? And there was a famine in the land as he was basically traveling around, and he went down into Egypt and stayed there. And now when we go back to Genesis chapter 26, I've just shown you the famine from that period in time, which is different from this first famine. There is 100 years difference between these two events. I don't know about you, but how many different crises financially have happened in the last 100 years? You can look at an example like this, for example, and this is just a list of different crises based on global and some in specific locations in the last 30 years. You can see there's more than 10 on this particular list. And like I said, this is only over the last 30 years. But it doesn't stop there, ladies and gentlemen, because the second clip is just as bad.
How does Abimelech fall for it again? You would think he'd be on alert when someone says, oh, this woman next to me, she's my sister.
Now, honestly, this would have been a better argument to make about the Bible reusing plot lines, but I'll show you why that's not even an issue in a moment. But the point is, Hemet is trying to argue that King Abimelech should have this sister detector and automatically just know that Isaac and Rebecca are not brother and sister. And I think it's at this point, it's right to say that who says it's the exact same Abimelech from the Abimelech previously who dealt with Isaac's father, Abraham? Now he mocks this idea and says, look, this is a king with apparently the same name governing over the same place, and you really want us to really take this seriously.
He just has the same name and runs the same kingdom as the other one. He's apparently just as gullible too. The
fact is, scholars basically will say this is because the name Abimelech actually means my father was king. And they see this as a name which is basically a kind of throne name for those who are on the throne. But think about it like this. Could you imagine in 50 years time, if someone comes along and says, look, I don't believe George Bush was president in 2001 of America because George Bush was president of America in 1989. Can you see the folly in this kind of argument? But let's say for sake of argument, this is the same individual. It's the same Abimelech, right? And why didn't Abimelech realize what was actually going on? Well, we can look at passages like Genesis 23 verse 1, as you can see here, which talks about Isaac's mother, Sarah, when she died. She died about 127 years old. This is important because just doing basic math, you would know that Isaac is around 40 years old at this particular point. And if we look at this passage here in Genesis 25 verse 20, it talks about how Isaac married Rebecca when he was 40 years old. The point is, this happened sometime after Isaac was 40 years old. This most likely happened around 70 years after what had happened previously with Abraham and Abimelech, if it is the exact same person. So why would he necessarily just remember that some guy came along and said, look, you know what, this is my sister? And since we're on this theme of crisis and famine, clip number 3 is an interesting one because he starts making fun of the Bible talking about the Lord blessed Isaac and he reaped in the same year that he sowed 100-fold. Listen to what he says.
I'm trying to understand the biblical economy here, and I can't. Planting crops? You're telling me no one figured that one out until Isaac? Really? How is that even a blessing? If you plant crops and water them, they'll grow. It's not magic. You didn't need God for that one.
So he plays this up and says, look, what is so special about planting crops? Think about the context. The Bible's telling us that in the midst of a famine, in the midst of hardship, this individual was able to succeed and flourish greatly. So it's similar to someone being in a credit crunch, a credit crisis, a financial crisis, and basically elevating their net worth. This isn't something which is something to laugh about or to frown about based on what the scripture is saying. This is something to acknowledge and realize, okay, wow, he was actually successful in a time when people were fearful and may not be necessarily planting crops or taking investment action and stuff like that. We touched on slavery briefly in this video. Listen to what he says.
I just want to point out that Isaac became rich, and the Bible says he used that money to buy slaves. And none of you even noticed that because the Bible just constantly glosses over slavery like it's not a big deal. You should be ashamed of yourselves.
Now, I've discussed this in videos I've done against Hemet Meta previously, but the fact of the matter is these slaves that Hemet Meta is trying to talk up are similar in many ways to what we'd reference today as an employee. This is Genesis chapter 16, and this is an example of a woman named Hagar. And you can see here that the Bible clearly says that the Lord was against this mistreatment of these particular individuals, and he tells this woman to name her son Ishmael. Why? Because the Lord has heard her affliction. If you go back one chapter to Genesis chapter 15 in the narrative, we've already seen that a slave was going to receive all of Abraham's wealth as an inheritance. And even two videos ago from what we're currently talking about now in Genesis chapter 24, we saw that a slave was entrusted with all of Abraham's wealth. So Hemet wants you to believe that these slaves spoken about in the Bible are something akin to what happened in America with the African slave trade, when it's clearly not. Considering we started today talking about reusing plot lines, Hemet Meta doesn't want to let this go, where he talks about women not being given names. Listen to what he says.
He named the wells. Lot's wife didn't get a name, but the wells do. Shows you how much respect the Bible has for women.
Now, I responded to this argument when I covered Genesis chapter 4 and Genesis chapter 5 and other passages which this came up in. But the fact of the matter is, I already said that in Genesis chapter 5, the Bible clearly teaches us, as you can see here, that the Lord named Adam, as you can see here, both male and female, Adam. He called their name Adam. Wives take the husband's name, just like they do today. Now, he goes on to talk about land and why nobody's fighting over a specific land. Listen to what he says.
How come no one was fighting over Rehoboth? I don't get why that one is any different.
So obviously, when you think about the fact that Abimelech is king of Gerar, right? We can look at a map to kind of answer this question. Gerar is in this particular location right here. And this isn't going to be a complete science, but scholars basically say that this place, Rehoboth, is towards the south of this place here, Beersheba. So if Rehoboth is somewhere down here at some point, somewhere in this particular region, if Isaac is basically going along and moving further and further away from Gerar, at some point it would be assumed that Isaac is moving away from Abimelech's territory. So if he continues to move away to somewhere in this particular region, then obviously people are not going to continue just pestering him all the way around different places in the country. And he goes on to speak about a place with the name Beersheba, and he talks about how this is getting named over and over again. I'm
pretty sure Beersheba has now been named like 8 separate times.
Who actually says it's talking about the same place? First and foremost, there are multiple different places all over the world which have the same name, even though it's not the same place. But secondly, more specifically, who even says that it's not Isaac here just re-establishing the name of the place, as people still do even till this day? Now, I said at the start of this video, the last thing we're going to cover today is a Bible contradiction, apparently. And this is with a man named Esau. In one passage in the Bible, in Genesis chapter 26, it says that he had a wife with one name. In a later chapter in the Bible, it talks about how this wife has another name.
That passage just said Bashemeth was the daughter of Elon the Hittite, but in Genesis 36, the Bible's gonna say Bashemeth is the daughter of Ishmael, because no one at the Bible factory keeps track of this stuff.
So if Esau's wife is named one thing in one place and then another thing in another place, are you trying to say that women can't have the same name now? Now, this is a table I've created which has even deeper analysis of this apparent contradiction. I'll leave it linked in the description box below for you to download it for free. But in the next video, you're going to hear Hemet Meta tell us why the Bible hates women. And you're going to want to hear some of the terrible arguments he actually brings next.